Welcome, Ricardo. Super stoked to be here speaking with Matthew Torres. Man, it's going to be an exciting conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Awesome to be here once again with you guys, our listeners, and having this awesome guest, Matthew. And looking forward to our conversation today. So welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. Really excited and honored to take part in this.
Absolutely. Man, so let's start with this. Let's start with decaf. We just had a conversation about, the world of decaf. You're starting to get into it. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about what you're doing with decaf, what you think about decaf, what you're kind of like learning, and why you're interested in decaf. It's something I think we don't talk about a lot, maybe, at least in my circle. And, now we have you here, and it's interesting.
Yeah, totally. I got into decaf during the pandemic. I still, at that time, I was drinking probably 3 to 4 cups a day, like caffeinated cups. And I was hitting a wall at 2. And I'm in my 30s, like anxiety, stress, depression, all of those things started creeping up. So I knew I was like, oh man, I'm gonna only have to do certain amount of coffees per day. And then I saw there's decaf, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can drink unlimited coffee. This is the perfect supplemental aspect for me. Luckily, I didn't have to go full decaf. I was still okay with caffeine, but I was a bit more sensitive. And I tried decaf from Stumptown, tried decaf from a ton of roasters that I admire. And it was really hard to find a decaf that was even just a middle of the road, okay coffee. It was always just I describe it as when you're drinking Coke and you drink Diet Coke, how Diet Coke has a Diet Coke taste. That's how decaf was to me. It was I know this isn't the real thing. And I'm I wonder if there's something that was closer to regular caffeinated specialty coffee or high quality coffee. And the closest one I got was from where you're at, Ricardo, it was from Black and White. They had an ethyl acetate coffee from Ethiopia, and it blew my mind. I was just it didn't have everything, but it still had acidity and sweetness. And then it gave me faith that there were coffees out there that were still brilliant, but they were caffeinated. But it was super hard. Black and White only carried it for a limited amount of time, and even the coffees that were winning these awards for decaf, they still had that marshmallow fake funk to them. So I was just okay, this is a place where I want to spend some time, because obviously I'm a consumer now, and I think 10% to 15% of every roaster across the US, there's decaf drinkers. So I'm maybe I'll focus there. So I launched Familiar Coffee this year, and that's the main focus. And the major decaf processes. I find that my favorite is EA process, or ethyl acetate, or sugarcane. It goes by many names. That's where we're kind of landing. We do have a mountain water process, which is similar to Swiss water, but in Mexico. And that coffee is probably a little bit under what we're looking for, but still gives you a good feeling of hey, this is a Honduras that's a special coffee. And just learning as much as possible about decaf. And that's kind of the latest venture that I've been curious about and part of so far.
I think this is awesome, because I think that there's definitely an opportunity in there for a company like Familiar to really navigate or offer decaf coffees, really really tasty decaf coffees, because remember who doesn't remember seeing someone wearing a t-shirt saying death before decaf, right? And then more and more, it's not the case in terms of flavor profile or flavor. You can find really tasty decaf coffee without that marshmallow taste or that fake taste that sometimes it creates, depending the process, right? I've been lucky enough to visit multiple different types of decaffeination plants and different processes as well, and taste blindly decaf coffees that you need to be really, really an expert in, even though you may not even pick up that the coffee is the decaf coffee. And there are so many awesome decaf coffees out there, just like you mentioned. And I'm excited. I'm actually going to have to go online and order familiar decaf coffee just to try out.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, check it out. And I'm always curious. I think like one of the hardest things, I'm very new into this side of the coffee business. I've always been a consumer. I've been a consumer for about 7 years. And I think like, I'm starting to ask this small segment of consumers that are like trying it for the first time, like all of these questions, because I know specialty coffee caffeinated consumers pretty well just because of my history. But I think like this, like a niche of a niche is something that's brand new. And I have thoughts, and I'm sure like roasters might be watching this and have like assumptions about like how consumers react and how they shop and how they, do they want whole bean? Do they want grinded coffee? Does it matter what the labels look like? Is it too much information? All of these questions, like now I'm going through and I'm like, man, this is a lot to like dive into, and hopefully I can continue to learn and iterate over time.
Yeah, 100%. So one thing that you mentioned there is, you've been a consumer for 7 years, and now you've gotten to know a lot of consumers, and you obviously had your moment of what you liked about specialty, what you were looking for as an early consumer. What is it that you were looking for when you first got into specialty coffee, and then what is something common that you find a lot of consumers that they're constantly looking for when they want to, get involved or try different coffees or start drinking, specialty coffee, or, start to have that approachability? Like what is it that they look for, and what are some of the barriers that a lot of consumers might face when getting into this part of coffee? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think there's multiple layers to that question. I think when I came into specialty coffee, I was drinking mostly like Starbucks, gas station coffee, and then just loading it with creamer. And that was my introduction to coffee. And then before that, it was abuela's house, grandma's house, around the table having pan dulce, just always having it as like a staple in our kitchen at every time of the day. There was no decaf for Latinos in our household, but it was just like always coffee on, somebody coming into the kitchen. So coffee has always been around, but that first introduction for me was cold brew. And I think it's approachable. It was like a to-go container, and it was something easy. Like I didn't have to do anything. It was already ready. And I think that was important for me. But at that time, I really didn't understand what specialty was. I was very new, and it took the barista when I went back the second time to say like, hey, like these flavors are actually from the coffee and not like added later. And I always just thought like, oh, you have foods and different flavors, like you just add those. And like, I didn't really get the concept of like, oh, this came from like the actual coffee plant. And then I didn't know about like processors or anything like that, and how like Ethiopian coffee or even Colombian coffee. I think Colombian coffee is a great example of like, it's very diverse. You can get something from one farm to another and taste like it's from Indonesia or Ethiopia. So
sometimes same farm, sometimes same farm. Yeah, the coffee can taste totally different.
Even I always like the example of, we have a farm we work with in Brazil. You go to their farm and they've created this microclimate where their coffees taste very unique, super tasty, and so different from the neighboring farm. So it's like it's crazy what the differences you can find.
Yeah, the diversity within same farms, it's insane sometimes.
Yeah, and I had no context. So I think like in the beginning it was just, it's a coffee. And then over time, it took, baristas and experts to educate me and, what this coffee is and how it's produced and things along those lines. But I think from my journey, it took me about a month to realize that I really wanted to get into like making coffee at home. And before that, I only had like a French press, and I really wanted to like take the leap to a pour over. And once I got my first pour over, it was like a ceramic pour over from Japan. Like, it was such a ritual for me that like still to this day, like this morning, I like made a pour over, and just seeing like the bubbles of the coffee and just slowing down to have intentionality about it is still very special to me. But yeah, I think early on it was not knowing anything and relying on the industry essentially to give me the information that I was looking for. And then now it's at a point where I went through different stages. I went through, and it was, I'll be honest, like it was a stage of like putting my nose up to Starbucks. And I realized how like silly that was because they opened so many doors to the industry. And then as you develop, then I went into like I want the craziest coffee phase. So I had like, whatever natural or, you're fermenting this with something, like I was all about it. And then now I'm at the stage where like, I feel like I'm an old man, but I just want a really sweet coffee that's middle of the road, and I'm good with it. And I'm open to blends now. I was like an elitist to single origins for a long time.
You are not alone, my friend.
Yeah. So it's just, it's like growing up, you realize like how silly your mindset was. And there's, I think, like if you think about a freeway and like exits, like you can go down all of these exits of like, and stay in that area of like, and not evolve over time. But I think most people that I've talked to that's been in the industry 8, 12 years, 15, 20 years, listening to their wisdom has got me to a point a bit faster where like I don't get stuck with like, only good coffee comes from elevation at X or these like kind of silly arbitrary thoughts. And nowadays I see it all the time on Instagram, and I don't use TikTok, but probably there when I see different videos. But it's all of these like, this is the way. I'm right. I'm a creator. You got to listen to me. Look how dope this looks. And it's less, actual experts talking about things that they tested or, it actually matters. So probably a lot there. So, yeah.
No, that's super cool. I think that, you definitely matured very quickly, because I guess rubbing shoulders with so many experts. And then you were able to really get a fast track, so to speak, to where you are. But, we were talking about earlier as well about Long Beach Coffee Club and how you launched Long Beach Coffee Club to kind of like help other consumers to really understand or dive in a little deeper into learning about specialty coffee or learning about coffee. And I just think that is such a cool and fantastic initiative. And, I would love to hear a little bit more about that because, again, coming from someone that was totally just like a consumer curiosity in terms of specialty coffee or better quality coffee, drinking or having this initial induction through cold brew, and then now you're like fast forward and you realize that there is a market for higher quality decaf. And then now going even deeper and saying like, how can we make this a little bit more palatable or even easier to understand for people that are just initiating on this journey, right? And then that's how you started, because you started, Long Beach Coffee Club. And I would love to hear, or, our listeners to hear a little bit about that approach. And, I have so many things, my mind's just like, turning right now, and I have so many questions I want to ask. But I think that if you can just explain to us coming in, opening a platform for consumers to understand better coffee and how that went and how that is going and how beneficial do you think that initiatives like that could be incredible for our industry moving forward as well?
Yeah. So Long Beach Coffee Club kind of birthed out of me being at a cafe, trying to talk to a busy barista. There was a cafe right down the street. They kind of had it set up like a sushi bar where you're like sitting at the bar. Every time we would get into like a deep conversation about whatever in coffee, they would get pulled away because they're busy being baristas. So I was just like, there has to be like a handful of other coffee nerds out there that like are, not a roaster, not going to open up a coffee cart or whatever and work in the industry, but they want to like nerd out and just be like, hey, have you tried this coffee, and like do things. So I created this small group, and it kind of grew pretty fast in the beginning. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do? So me not knowing anything, I then got a barista involved and was just like, hey, Kim. And she was wonderful. She's a super great teacher. I was just like, let's start off with the history of coffee, because like everyone needs to know the history. It was the worst idea. It was like super boring. It was at a cafe at night. People were like selling other things because like they weren't really buying coffee. It was just a mess. But like over time, I realized I was just like, okay, like listening and like understanding like what do people want to learn? Okay, like how do I make coffee at home a bit better? How to optimize that, or how do roasters work, and how do they like understand profiles, and what's cupping, and can I do latte art? Can I steam milk? And all of these like workshops. And so over time, it kind of developed into that, but it took a while to understand like, what this base really wanted. I think some of the coolest memories I had from that time was right before the pandemic. We did these things called clubhouses. It was just like in one of my buddies' garages. And we were just like, I don't know if this is like a universal thing. This is like a US thing. But like when we were in grade school and elementary school, we had like show and tell. So we would bring something in and go to the front of class and show and tell. So I was just like, okay, this is it. So we'll do show and tell with coffee, and everyone will bring like a little bit of coffee and then tell everybody about it. We'll brew it up and everyone can taste it. It was very fascinating because like you tasted like great coffee, not so great coffee, but everyone was excited. And I think that was like, and during those times, I always like seeded in experts. So like baristas or roasters and then people in it. So then like, there wasn't as big of a gap. Like it was just like a full immersion of conversations. And then there was actually people to answer questions there. And I think that is like a brilliant thing where it was less formal, but there was a lot of great conversations and like sidebars. And I think that was really fun. Yeah. And I'm thinking like, there's so many things we did. Like early on, Blue Bottle like took over the OG cafe that was like big and specialty in the Arts District called Handsome Coffee. Mm-hmm. And we got to like go in there and taste Mokhtar's first Yemen coffee Blue Bottle had. And that was like one of the God in the cup moments for me. I was just like, coffee can be this good. Like, and then I tasted like numerous coffees from like Juan Peña in Ecuador up in San Francisco, and then had a coffee in Tokyo from Coffee Mamea. And I was just like blown away, like how far coffee can go. So yeah, it's been a interesting and fun journey. But I think like the consumers, there's a huge void of consumer education. And I agree, like there still needs to be a space for that. Me working now with like focusing on decaf, I don't have the capacity there, but at a time I was at like a coffee conference and giving talks on like, hey, go create your own Long Beach Coffee Club. This is how I did it. And hopefully, maybe some of those people around LA have small, gatherings still, because my hope was just like not to hold it all for myself. I want to like teach people to like just go on Meetup or whatever platform you want to set up and do it yourself. Like, people are lonely. That was like the higher thing. Like I realized there are people that were new to the city or just, didn't really have the capacity to, meet new people, and then like friendships were made and all of that stuff. So I think it was a great time.
Fascinating. I love that. And I definitely think that we as industry experts, in a sense, we should foster that type of or create opportunities such as, Long Beach Coffee Club, or opportunities for sharing knowledge, and also to just relate to people and talk to them. We did a series here at Ally a few years before I think it was before the pandemic, and we partnered with the local library system, where we did a 4 series on the history of coffee. And it was just like, just going in and talking about the history of coffee, and, how coffee started, and, what is coffee doing today, and the journey of coffee, so to speak. And we had no idea, we thought it was going to be something just small. And then at the end, we had coffee throughout the presentation and so on. And I kid you not, we had, in one of the days we had this event, we had close to 55 people consumers coming in and sitting down here in our office and just listening about the history of coffee. And I guarantee you, these people, and then you saw people, people talking afterwards, and sometimes people would be here still an hour after we finished. And it was so cool to see that. That goes hand in hand with the belief that I have that coffee is a connector, has the power to connect. And throughout the history of coffee, you have seen how coffee has connected people in different eras, right? And I think we cannot, lose sight of the essence of coffee, which is this, having this power of really connecting people, and when you're sharing knowledge is even better, right?
Yeah, and I think also one thing that I love about what you do with Long Beach Coffee Club is that you saw, I don't even know if I want to say you saw a challenge, but you saw, I guess, maybe a hole that you wanted to fill, and that's consumer education, or like an approachability. And your solution was, okay, let's create community. Your solution was community to me, right? And that's something I think that like is super important when we want to move the industry forward, is how can we use the community to keep, or how can we mobilize the community, right? That's the word, to keep making coffee approachable, educate consumers, and keep moving it forward, right? And so I'm gonna go out on kind of a limb here though, and I want to ask you is, one thing I always think about is how can we get coffee to a point that's like wine? Like wine, there's a larger group of consumers that at least understand variety, at least understand regions, and that at least understand there's red, white, pink, champagne, or sparkling, right? In coffee, maybe there's not as large group of consumers that maybe they know at least country as an origin, but to say they understand variety, or they understand that there's Arabica, Robusta, I wouldn't say it's as a large group as wine consumers. So in your perspective, or with your experience, like what do you think coffee still needs, or what do you think coffee needs to do to keep trying to get closer to get to that kind of level, right? And I'm not saying coffee's going to get there in the next 5-10 years. It'd be amazing, but there's an entire, I feel like there's an entire generation that we have to go through for coffee to get to wine. But in your perspective though, what more can we do to get there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've had a few conversations about people in like the spirits industry through my lives, and the first thing that comes to mind is like making coffee less like wine and more like craft beer, because craft beer is not as elitist. It just, I don't know, like you go and crack a beer. Like when you open up a bottle of wine, there's like maybe like an expectation there. And that, like, I love wine. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but like knowing like the archetypes of like each group, I think like I resonated with that when that individual said that. I'm trying to remember who it was, but like there is education in both sides of wine and craft beer. But like to get to the point where you're just like, I like Pilsners and not porters in craft beer, that's still education. And then like there's like the craft beer nerds that like know the hops and all these aspects. So I think about coffee as, like 4 segments. Like I think about new to specialty coffee, you got introduced by like a local cafe, or if you're on holiday, a lot of Americans go to Hawaii, like they'll drink specialty coffee there now from like Paradise and other specialty coffee roasters. And that's how they get introduced. And then they're like, oh, I want this good tasting coffee that, doesn't have like a traditional coffee or diner taste, and they want that. Or like a friend or a family introduces them, but they don't understand, like you said, like the process is pulling out flavors, they just think about coffee simply. It's like, oh, this is like a better coffee. Like when you drink like a $2 Chuck from Trader Joe's wine, and you drink like a $20 Ryan from like Paso Robles, like, it's like, oh, this is a bit better. Then you have like another segment that's like specialty coffee drinkers, probably 3 years plus drinking specialty coffee. They kind of understand. I think it takes that time, and probably we'll spend a lot of this conversation is just like those new customers, but like those existing customers that like understand, like, they either in their local cafe, James Hoffman or somebody else reading, even a local library and an expert coming and explaining what third wave coffee is. They'll learn maybe the processes, and they'll have like a few of their favorite roasters. And I see, like, being with Long Beach Coffee Club, those consumers going in two directions. There's like the purist, and then there's the generalist. The purist is what I became, shot by producer, maybe like I don't do this, but like there's, Carl Be Like Coffee on Instagram that will rate coffees. And that's how I find new coffees, which is fascinating. And they mostly drink like single origin, and they like their coffee black, like never sugar or milk. But then on the other side, there's the generalist that like has no specialty coffee for years. They're okay with blends, but they just want good tasting coffee, middle of the road, that's consistent. And they enjoy coffee black or with milk. So I think going back to like the journey of like year 1 to 3, yeah, there's probably like simple ways to introduce like choose your own adventures, and a company that's a tech company that I think does this pretty well. And the bigger companies do this because they have probably a bunch of market research. There's two. There's Trade Coffee, that's like a subscription. The way they ask questions is what I think is like the excellence of a barista at the counter. Because some of the best baristas early on in my coffee journey will ask, like, what are you into? What kind of flavors do you like? Basic questions to gather, like, hey, maybe behind the scenes they have a natural coffee and a wash coffee, and then they have, and then all of their other drinks. Just maybe simplicity wise, they'll focus on just black coffee. These online sources do this really well. Stumptown does it really well to try to navigate what people like to increase, like, not overwhelming consumers. But I think it starts with questions and then maybe like education along the way. But there's so much. Like, I don't think, in my opinion, the first 3 years, like, the variety doesn't matter. Like the elevation doesn't matter. Flavors, directional, helpful, but talked to a lot of roasters that hate flavors. And I think that's the wrong attitude. Like, flavors are helpful, but they're not like end all be all. I think process is probably more important to me, but it's hard to teach. But speaking to Mokhtar from Port of Mocha, like the Yemen guy, like was part of the book series and everything like that. He was probably as close to consumers as I was, like doing like the book readings and stuff. And I was like, yo, man, like, where are like middle America? Where are consumers at with coffee education? And these are probably like Starbucks drinkers mostly, or maybe year one consumers. And he was like, people don't even know coffee's a cherry. And it like made me stop and go, okay, maybe we start there. So yeah, with all of that, like, I think just like starting at the beginning, but not like the history stuff is great. And it's a great introduction in like talking about coffee houses and philosophers and how the Dutch stole this and all of that. That's dope. But like, you know, we're all going through a million things. We're all consuming a million things. Like, just basic thing like, hey, coffee to cherry, you know, this is processes, 2 processes, maybe not even introducing honey, just saying washed and natural, and then some directional stuff. But I think there's still room for an additional category.
Super interesting. So let's talk about then, like, let's flavor really for a little bit, because flavor is something that you repeat quite a bit, and it's something that we've heard a lot talked about on this podcast as well. And flavor is such a complex, it's such a, for me, a complex topic, because you can talk about flavor, you know, in competition. You can talk about how you explain flavor, how you perceive flavor, what creates flavor. So there's so many things around flavor. As a consumer, like when talking about flavor and flavor profiles and explaining flavor, how do you make those conversations approachable? How do you talk about that with consumers, you know?
Yeah. No, flavor is an interesting one, because I think like I understand what the SCA did with flavors, because like I can imagine like a coffee professional from China and a coffee professional from Italy, like there's cultural divides there. So I understand those aspects, but like most consumers, at least it took me a while. Like, I don't know what stone fruit is. I'll be honest. Like, so I think like approachable flavors is the direction. And it's just like to give a hint on like what the coffee is going to introduce to you, and then say like, okay, like I know, I don't like lemon flavored things. So maybe this coffee that says lemon custard is probably not for me, but it's probably for somebody else. So I think it's helpful there. I think when you go deep into flavor, I think you kind of get in territory that's, you know, a bit posturing, to be honest and to be frank. I know you used this before, and I'm not hating on you, Nick, but like, I think like the lime Fruit Loop is just silly.
No, Fruit Loops, the cereal Fruit Loops.
No, Fruit Loops.
Yeah,
but like,
right.
I think like,
Call me out.
I'm not hating on you, but
I love it.
Do it.
But I think like that, I don't know. I think like that kind of level is just not as helpful. But in even like very specific, like niche fruit, like kumquat, like, like who eats a kumquat? I've never had that, you know? So yeah. So I think overall it's levels to there, you know, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think. 'Cause like overall it's, you know, a certain level, maybe like blueberry, lemon, orange, basic is helpful for direction. Brown sugar is helpful, so you can see like sweetness. But yeah, it kind of, it will hurt the cause if you go too deep, from my opinion, from the consumer side.
Yeah, I think that I totally agree with you. And I judged the Brewers Cup from the beginning years. I guess 2016 was the first year. No, sorry. 2012 was the first year that they had the Brewers Cup, and I was a judge. And I probably can get the award of the most basic flavor profile describing judge, because I try to stick with, you know, orange or dark chocolate or peanuts or, you know, almonds, or, you know, and again, and I did that because, again, there are some descriptors or flavors or fruits that I have never experienced before, and especially in the compulsory, not the open service, but the compulsory side of it. I always try to stick to really flavor profiles that was like, okay, this is definitely chocolate or dark chocolate or milk chocolate, and not go too deep into it, because it can be confusing, right? When you're talking about the different cultures and the different, you know, geographical areas. You know, I just came back from Southeast Asia a couple of months ago, and I was blown away by the layers of flavors that Southeastern Asian people have access to, that we do not have access here, right? And I understood. I was like, wow. I understand why most of the competitors from Southeast Asia, they actually do really well in the competitions, because they are born into these beautiful, complex layers of flavors, because that's their culture, and that's, you know, what they experience on the daily basis. But then, you know, if you can't translate over to this side of the world as easy as folks that were born there and they had that experience from birth. Okay, so if we understand that less is more for consumers that are starting to dive into higher quality coffees or specialty coffees, I think we can do a better service for the whole entire industry. And in this case, to me, definitely less is more. And not trying to be overcomplicated when we're describing something or being super, you know, if I say this tastes like an orange, and you know the acidity is like an orange like, and then people are going to taste, oh yes, I can see it. But if I go like, oh, this is like, I don't know, some sort of like a citrus fruit that nobody actually, you know, eats or has experienced, it's not going to relate the same way, right? So I think that definitely less is more in this phase, you know?
Yeah, and I would say for me too, like when I think of like flavor and when I drink coffee, sometimes I think of like things that I'm reminded of that I get reminded of that I eat on a daily basis, right? Like, so when I say Fruit Loops, for example, when I taste Ethiopian coffee and I taste the blueberry, I go to Fruit Loops because it's, for some reason, the notes in there is like, takes me back to my childhood eating Fruit Loops, right? But obviously for some people, be like, man, what does a Fruit Loops taste like? So it might be too really, really there, you know? So, but to say like, you know, I also want coffee explained in a way where it's like overly complex, like, oh, it has like medium high acidity and it has this body. It's like, well, then that's, even for me, that's overwhelming. And it's like, I don't care what the body's like. I want to know if it tastes good or not, right? So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's how I would see it too, you know?
Yeah, I think for the consumer that is just starting off, I don't even talk about body at all. I mostly talk about flavors, because when you start diving into the different facets or descriptors, then, and if you're going into the details, you know, the body and the acidity and the balance and the aftertaste and all of that, you know, the general audience that is just starting, they can get lost, and that's not the purpose, right? The purpose is educating them and communicating in a very clear way or understandable way that even a child can really define or find what you're talking about when they're tasting it. I think that simplicity is of essence.
Yeah, it makes me think about the theory of like Picasso's bull, where, you know, I think there's still a lot of work to be done for flavors in coffee. Like Picasso's bull theory was just like remove as much as the bull as possible, so you just get the essence of it. And if someone or, you know, a group spends time there, I think it would be very helpful. And that's what guides, you know, the Apples of the world, is just like, they want simplicity. They've mastered that. And, you know, maybe simplicity looks like another emotion that people could connect to, and maybe it's filling. Filling is something that was introduced to me by like Michelle Johnson from Ghost Town Oats years back, and she was just like, this coffee makes me feel like a Drake song on a Friday night. I was just like, what? And then I drank it and I was like, oh, I get it. Like, you're off work, you know, you're free, and it makes you feel good. And then I went to Antigua years later, and I was at Artista de Cafe, wonderful cafe in Antigua, and their flavor was just like, it feels like Christmas Day and baking spices in the kitchen. And I was like, what? And I drank it like after I came home. I was like, this is it. You know, if you can nail a filling, like it crosses cultures, it crosses divides. It's not, you know, most people can get, windows down by like your favorite road, or if like you're driving down PCH by the ocean, or, those kind of feelings. Like, how special is that?
Absolutely.
You're speaking my vibe.
That's right. And it's part of your sensorial memory, right? Things that you came across, you experienced throughout your life that makes you relate to that. I think this is a brilliant way, to look at coffee as well, and the memories that will bring you, right? Or it's like very nostalgic. I remember growing up and getting a piece of bread and then put some butter on it and get the skillet and just let that that butter burn in the bread, and then
Sizzle.
just dude, something about that I makes me want to go out of here right now and get a bread and then do the same. So yes, but sometimes, and that's the beauty of it, right? The sensory memory, and then we all have our own. It's how can we generalize that too? It's very difficult, right? So I love relating the feeling with your memorial sensory and how that translates into a cup of coffee sometimes. Just like something really nostalgic and beautiful.
Nostalgic, that's the word. And I want to end this feeling like that because I want to end it on a good feeling, right? But no, Matthew, dude, super, super grateful to have you here. Thank you for giving us perspective on all things consumer or approachability and whatnot. And it was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I love where this conversation went. If I can paint the picture for where Nick is sitting right now, think Encanto, the movie from Disney, and then imagine, like, this is the feeling where we're going to end with, imagine like a huge hawk just circling the city, as beautiful as, and the mountains, and just how beautiful Colombia is. And then maybe that will introduce you to watch the video portion of this and see my messy room. But like, honestly, it is the most beautiful backdrop. It looks fake, and I can't wait to come visit you guys.
Oh yeah, Medellin is it's incredible here. You're welcome anytime.
Amazing. All right, I'll see you in February. I'm going to be in Barranquilla for Carnival, so we'll make a stopover.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I'll be here.
I love it. All right, guys, thank you so much for the time.
Matthew, thank you so much, man. Such an honor. Super stoked to have this opportunity to talk to you. And I know for a fact that a lot of our listeners are going to super enjoy this conversation, because it adds on so much to our day-to-day and to people's lives, and relates to so many people that love coffee, from pros to really like people starting up. We have a lot of people that are listening to our podcast that we didn't even know that they would be interested in listening to it. So I know that their lives are going to be enriched by this conversation as much mine has. So thank you so much for spending this time with us.
My absolute pleasure.